Chapter 301, Vacation 2. Really? That's a great idea. I also got 10 days off from my mom. Wow. Seriously. Unlike Murakan, whose face was distorted with disappointment, Gilly smiled, her eyes sparkling. She was genuinely happy that everyone was going on vacation together. That sounds exciting. I should get some new clothes and a makeover too. You sound happy, Gilly. The idea of all of us being together again is really exciting. It's been a long time since we last saw each other. Haha. When are we leaving? We can't waste a minute if you're that happy, Gilly. Let's leave tomorrow, Jean said. What? Tomorrow? Then I must get to the city right away before the stores close. Go ahead, Gilly. Have fun. Gilly grabbed her purse and rushed out of the room. Jean smiled after her. Murakan just sighed. Let me say this in advance. I only told Gilly to take a vacation, and I never suggested that we all spend it together. Humph. Did I ever ask? Murakan said petulantly. No, it feels like you're blaming me for getting permission. Who says I got permission? Well, never mind. For some reason, Jean felt satisfied. Well, still, I don't feel bad seeing her so happy. If Strawberry Pie is happy, that's more than I can ask for. That makes me feel bad for gloating, you know? What? Were you gloating? You brat. Murakan glared at him, so Jean quickly pointed outside. If you're so eager for a date, hurry up and follow Gilly right now. You could help her pick out clothes and watch them do her hair. That's a kind of date, isn't it? You could bring her a fruit juice while she's shopping. Oh, that's an idea. I take back what I said about you. Jean and Murakan high-fived. I'll be back late. Murakan ran out. Jean smiled as he looked out the closed window and watched Murakan catch up to Gilly. They left the Garden of Swords together. Gilly looked very happy as she turned and smiled at Murakan. They're so cute. As for me, I should take a well-deserved nap. Jean had been exhausted ever since his return to the Garden of Swords. He had to fend off Siren's attack as soon as he arrived, battle Mary and Silderay, and carry out the assassination task of the Black Knight. He was overloaded with work, without any time for rest. Jean fell asleep as soon as his head touched the pillow. It was nighttime when he woke up. A cool breeze was blowing, and the moon cast a beautiful light through the open window. Gilly and Murakan hadn't returned yet. They were atop a hill, enjoying the nighttime view of Kalen with some fruits and beer. Jean thought of savoring the quiet nighttime breeze from his bed for a while longer, only to abruptly get out of it. I never opened the window, and neither would Petro. The window couldn't have opened on its own due to the breeze. He knew he had closed it before going to sleep. Only one kind of being would sneak in through windows like thieves, assassins. He knew he had a pretty deep sleep, but he should have been alert enough to notice if there were any assassins. He didn't believe his brothers were foolish enough to let assassins into the very Garden of Swords. But in any case, he always maintained a certain level of alertness. He hadn't noticed the window opening. How skilled could the culprit be? Jean looked around in alarm. Then he chuckled when he saw a green rose tied to the nightstand. It was a green rose. Looks like Yona came. That explains everything. He would never have felt her approaching with the level of alertness he maintained. There was a letter next to the flower. Dear little brother, congratulations on becoming a flag bearer. I was right by your side, but you were sleeping as if you didn't care about anything. I considered killing you, especially because you disappeared after last year's incident and didn't bother to tell me anything. But if I pulled out a dagger, maybe you would wake up. I came by because I missed you. What did you say? You missed me too? Of course, I know. You don't have to tell me. It seems you've grown much stronger, and I'm proud of you. I didn't wake you up because you look tired. Lately, I've had a lot of orders and I've been very busy. All I can hope for is that some of my targets are people you need to get rid of or who have harmed you. Anyway, let's meet again when things are a bit less hectic. Goodbye for now. Surprisingly, the letter turned into dust and dispersed once he finished reading it. It wasn't magic. The letter was written on specially treated paper by Samuel. Wow, Yona. I'm not sure if I should say she's being nice or just plain deadly. Jean thought about how Yona must have secretly snuck in just to leave a green rose and a letter. He felt grateful. The rest of his brothers wanted him dead, but Luna and Yona constantly reminded him of what having a family meant. He held the green rose up to the moonlight. It reminded him of the patch of green roses he saw in Samuel with Yona. He couldn't take his eyes off it for a while. Almost forgot. He remembered he had agreed to have a drink with the Tana twins, and they had also promised him some good liquor. The Tana twins and Emma must have been waiting for quite some time. Emma would be eager, especially. He headed to the Tana's room. He opened their door and burst into laughter once again. Seems like many things are making me laugh today. A party to commemorate the friendship of Flagbearers 12, 10, and 11 from Run Candle, and the successful first mission of Flagbearer 12. Quite an honor. Jean spotted a large banner with those words as soon as he entered the room. His praise was extremely evident in the way the 12th was mentioned before the others. Upon inspecting the banner, Jean saw the Tana twins, both wearing luxurious, questionably sourced cone hats, and there were lit candles on a table filled with fruits and snacks. "Hello, Jean. Sit wherever you like." "Haha. Brothers, what's all this?" "Oh, about that. When Emma heard you were coming." He could hear the sound of meat sizzling from the inner chambers. Emma had been waiting all night to impress Jean by cooking the meat just as he arrived. She then poked her head out from the kitchen to find Jean and hurriedly removed her aprons to greet him politely. "You've come, young Master Jean. I've made many mistakes in front of you all this time. So, as an apology, I've prepared some simple dishes and drinks for you." It was more than awkward. It was outrageously ridiculous, causing Jean to burst into laughter at the preparations. However, it doesn't look simple at all. This seems quite serious. "Did you make all this food by yourself?" "This is nothing compared to what you did for me and the young Tana masters on the day you returned, sir." "Are you sure it's not poisoned?" "Haha, of course not. Why don't you start with the appetizers? I'll be right back with the main course." Jean took his seat. This brought a smile to Emma's face. It also relieved the Tana twins, who had been worried that Emma's overly prepared welcome might leave him with a bad impression. This is quite commendable. That's what Jean thought. He was quite pleased that they had gone to such lengths to show their desire to be on his side. Yona's gift had contributed to his good mood as well. "They are trying so hard to win me over. Maybe I should play along." Haitona opened a bottle. The fragrance of its contents filled the room. "Congratulations, Jean." "Congratulations." It was the first time Jean had engaged in casual conversation with the Tana twins. They talked about things most close friends did. Frivolous and mostly insignificant things. The twins did most of the talking while Jean listened. Part of it was because Emma had advised them to get closer to Jean, but it was also because the twins genuinely wished to befriend him. Initially, it was because of Jin's strength and quirkiness. But now, it was purely out of brotherly affection. One that had grown from all the days they spent together at Stormcastle and as cadets. Of course, the Tana twins had offended Jean countless times in the past, but they had also looked out for him on several occasions. The number of empty bottles grew. Emma didn't join their conversation until past midnight and filled Jean in on clan and Huffaster affairs. Of everything that was discussed, here's what Jean observed. "Young Master Jean, my clan, the Neeltros, is a martial arts clan, but we also produce many judges every year. There are also quite a few active judges in my immediate family. So, I've heard something strange from my older brother, who serves as the chief judge of the Ponta region." "What is it?" "Apparently, young Master Joshua issued a particular order to all the judges in Huffaster to lower the threshold for the death penalty. Is it to reduce crime rates? Well, executing criminals is certainly one way to do it." Emma nodded at Daitona's comment. "That's probably the reason. But the interesting thing is the fact that convicted criminals have been transported to Rickerlton for execution instead of their own regions since the threshold was lowered." "Rickerlton? Isn't that a city in the southern region?" Jean asked. "Yes, it is, young Master Jean. And there's another peculiar thing about it." "Go on." "I've heard that the convicted criminals transported to Rickerlton are only executed in mass. Executions are carried out in batches of several hundred at a time, but no one actually witnesses the executions. They only show how they burn the bodies. A conversation Jean had in the past suddenly resurfaced in his mind. Do you know how that woman creates copies of Joshua? I only know that it requires a large number of humans. What? It seemed they used convicts in Huffister. They sent them to the seer and he got a new body. He mostly used those bodies to handle people like me, to reinforce potential contractors, and suppress them in case of overload. That had been the conversation when Jean convinced Julian to join his side in Tychon. If what Emma had told him was true, then Rickelton was likely the city where Joshua was, using the convicts needed to create copies of himself. Emma wouldn't have brought this up knowing about the seer and Joshua's copies. She must have brought up almost anything related to him, knowing I'm hostile towards him. To think I'd get a lead from someone so random. Emma certainly didn't know anything about the seer or Joshua's copies. But he guessed there might be something in Rickelton when he saw Jean deep in thought after hearing the news she brought. I'm just a nanny. Maybe I went too far talking about the second flag bearer. I promise to mind my words when you're not around, young Master Jean. She hinted that she would never speak of this to anyone but him. Emma was very clever in that regard. Seems like a smart thought. Jean smiled as he joined Emma and the Tana twins. Chapter 302. Vacation 3. The next morning, early, a group of swordsmen dressed in robes crossed the courtyard of the Garden of Swords. Their eyes were sharp and focused. They seemed to have a very important agenda. They were elders. There were about 20 in the group. It was very rare to see the elders of Runcandle walking together. The servants dared not lift their heads from a bow. Meanwhile, all the guardian knights greeted them warmly with each step. Everyone was curious about where the elders were headed, but they didn't dare to ask. It's the elders. The Tana twins had just woken up. They rubbed their eyes and looked out the window. Where are they going? Uncle Jed is with the group too. For some reason, it looks like they're heading to Jin's room. The Tana twins were right. The elders were heading to Jin's room. Elder Jed, are you sure about this? Please, don't tell me you have trust issues. How many times do I have to tell you? I showed you the evolved form of the final move, the Petal Cascade, didn't I? I'm telling you, I couldn't have done it alone. This was why. The elders had come to see Jin. It was the final move. After Jed improved the Petal Cascade, he requested a review from the Council of Elders. As the elders were unaware of how it had come about, they naturally congratulated Jed and suggested that his name be added to the new version of the Petal Cascade. However, Jed insisted that Jin's name be added to the move instead, as he had contributed significantly to improving the technique. But I just don't get it. How could you discover the key to improving the final move from a kid who just became a flag bearer? In fact, it was only a few days ago that you taught him the Petal Cascade, Elder Jed. Curse it. Are you saying I'm lying for the sake of the 12th flag bearer? Your suspicions never end. If you're going to keep acting like this, you'd better stop following me. All right. You know that's not what I'm trying to say. Why don't we calm down a bit? I admit it. It's my fault. Yeah, it was your fault. Elder Jed is not one to lie. Besides, do you remember the strange thing the 4th flag bearer told us last night? One elder scolded the other while giving Jed a shoulder massage. He said that the 12th flag bearer executed a sword move during the mission that was superior to the 6th final move, lightning. Maybe the 12th flag bearer is a figure who can provide crucial clues to improving Runcandle clan's final moves. Just as Elder Jed said. Dyfus deliberately leaked information about the Legend's master move Jean used in the mission, the Thunderblade, to the elders. He knew Jean would never tell him even if he asked, so he chose to use the elders. It was undoubtedly a wise decision. And the 4th flag bearer is not one to lie either. That's why we're all gathered here to confirm it for ourselves, aren't we? We're almost there, so bear your curiosity a little longer. All the elders pretended to cough as they closely watched Jed's reaction. They finally arrived at Jin's room. Old Sax, I can already imagine you drooling over Jin's sword skill. How dare you doubt my words? Jed gritted his teeth and knocked on the door. Answer the call of the Council of Elders. 12th flag-bearer, Jean Runcandle. Respond to the door immediately, Jed shouted, with a firm and resonant voice. But there was no response. Jean, come out immediately. There was no response to his second call either, so Jed forcefully opened the door. The lock broke as the door swung open, but there was no one in the room. The boy. Why isn't he here? This time it was Jed's turn to observe the elders' reactions. They all shrugged, as if to say, I knew it. It's a shame, Elder Jed. We all took our precious time to come here, and yet. Wait, it doesn't matter that Jean isn't here. Why do you all look disappointed? Don't you trust me? Come on. You know that's not it, Elder Jed. We believe you, of course. I'm sure the 12th flag-bearer has his reasons for his absence, haha. For now, let's go back. The elders immediately turned around and left, leaving Jed resenting Jean. That brat, where is he? Does he have any idea that his uncle was humiliated? Jean, on the other hand, was sipping a cocktail at a beachside tavern where seagulls serenaded. Gilly was feeding nearby birds, dressed in a light-colored dress. 2 more cocktails, please, just like the last order. By the way, isn't it about time they arrive, young master? Yes, and look, there they come. Jean pointed to the sky. Seagulls hastily took flight. A dragon was descending rapidly towards them. It was Murakan. Jin's companions in Taiken were also on his back. Oh, my lord, you have no idea how much I've missed you. Yes, sir. Jet definitely did it. Yuwu. Lord Jean. Jetu and Enya were the first to run to him. They were delighted, like puppies reuniting with their lost master. Hello, Jet and Enya. How have you been? Oh, I've been well, my lord. My life is always filled with happiness. Thanks to you. Oh, you've had so many troubles for so long. We heard your life has been tumultuous since you returned to the Garden of Swords. Oh, wait. I guess we should address him as Sir now and not Lord, right? Nevertheless, you look as handsome as ever. Why don't we start with you giving me an autograph? Make sure to write 12th flag-bearer of Runcandle there too. Right here on my back. Enya thumped her chest like an excited primate to show her joy, as she always did. Wow. Indeed. Enya, you must be thrilled to get an autograph, right? Yes, I'm sure you are. Good to see you, Jean. How have you been, Quicantle Nim? I've been well. Apart from Enya, Yuria, and Pinty whining about missing you every day, of course. Quicantle no longer asked Enya to maintain her Ulta contractor class. Sir Jean, you've always been a very mature person, but now, you truly feel like an adult. Alisa, please call me as always. The same goes for you, Enya. Should I then? Alisa gave Jean a slight hug after a handshake. This reminds me of the first day I met you, Lord Jean. Kashmir followed her and met Jean. Mr. Kashmir. My daughter, whom you saved, is doing very well. She's 9 years old now. Time really flies. She was only 5 when we first met. It had been 4 years since Jean had started building relationships with the people of Taiken. They felt more like family than Jin's siblings, and Taiken felt more like home than the Garden of Swords. Yuria and Latri couldn't join us. The confectionery is too busy, and Beriz has been helping out too. Kazan and Yulian are still busy with the mission you assigned them, Lord Jean. It was quite surprising to hear that Beriz was working in the confectionery, especially with her personality. Kashmir handed him a basket. It was filled with cookies, the tastiest and crunchiest Rietla cookies, the signature of the Rietla confectionery. However, the cookies weren't for Jean. Jean only opened the basket to look at the cookies and then closed the lid again. I hope he likes them. I'm sure he will. According to the agent's findings, Almango's contractor is dying to eat them. Jean and Kashmir burst into laughter. The 7-colored peacock had pinpointed Almango's contractor's exact location centuries ago. They had confirmed it even before Jean gave the order. As a result, they learned that Almango's contractor had a kind of obsession with Rietla cookies. The cookies began to gain worldwide fame for their delicate taste and fragrance sometime last year. They became so popular that even renowned figures from all over the world had to queue up to order these cookies. Articles and reviews about them appeared in all sorts of magazines and newsletters. For anyone with knowledge of pastries, Rietla cookies were a dream. The anticipation was such that there were even troubadours singing songs about the need to visit the Tycoon-free city at least once in a lifetime to taste Rietla cookies. However, only nobles and the wealthy, who had both the money and time for such things, could visit the Tycoon-free city to sample the cookies. Unfortunately, Almango's contractor belonged to neither category. Anyway, to begin with, Jean looked at his companions and continued, "Let's enjoy a few days of rest. We won't have many opportunities to be together like this." From that moment on, they left all work and worries behind and enjoyed themselves on the beach. They shared stories, invited city musicians to enjoy their songs, cooked for them, swam in the sea, and fished in the ocean. The 4 days of relaxation passed in the blink of an eye, as fast as a crab hiding its eyes. Jean and his companions had forgotten how enjoyable it was to simply relax and have fun for a long time. "It looks like you're all very close, sir. Thanks to your party, I think the tavern will set a new record for sales, sir." A tavern waiter addressed Jean. He had the youthful face of a man who had just turned 20, with a face and skin that seemed unusually moist for some reason. He didn't know who Jean and his companions were. If he had known, he wouldn't have been so eager to strike up a conversation. "Clamwell." The waiter was surprised at the abrupt mention of his name, especially since he hadn't mentioned his name to Jean or any of his companions. "Yes? How can I assist you, sir?" Jean placed the basket of Rietla cookies on the table. "I'm Jean Runcandle, the 12th flag-bearer of the Runcandle clan and the contractor of Soderette. This is a gift for you." There was a reason why Jean and his companions spent their few days off in this particular beachside tavern. It was because Clamwell, Almango's contractor, worked here. Clamwell stood still. He tried to speak, but no sound came from his mouth. He opened the box with trembling hands, releasing a fragrant and delicious cookie aroma into the air. "I've come because there's something I'm looking for from your god. If it's not too much trouble, could you call Almango for me?" Clamwell looked very surprised. It wasn't due to Jin's identity either. It was the basket full of cookies that was boggling his mind. "Are these really all for me?" "Of course. Do you think I could have some while we talk about this?" Jean nodded. Clamwell lifted a cookie with trembling hands. He took a bite. His face immediately turned red, and then he rolled his eyes. The cookie had a quite shocking taste too, but it was actually due to the manifestation of his god. It was quite similar to how Pecan had manifested in Fin Blanche. "This is amazing." "Yes, indeed. I'm fed up with seafood." "Almango?" "Wait a little, Soderette's contractor. Let me finish this first before I grant you what you seek." Almango stuck his head into the basket and started devouring the cookies. Class and dignity as a god were clearly something he did not possess. Chapter 303, Timar's Second Tomb 1. The tavern owner had gone home, leaving Clamwell in charge of the place. Jean and his companions were the only patrons left. Almango made a lot of noise as he devoured the cookies. He almost seemed like a god gone mad for cookies. He sucked in the treats like one drinks from a rare oasis in the desert. What kind of god is this? The scene surprised Jean. He also regretted not ordering more cookies. Naturally, Jin's companions also gathered to watch how the scene unfolded. For them, it was an amusing experience to see a god sticking his head into a basket to devour cookies. "More? Don't you have more?" Almango finally pulled his head out of the basket and asked after finishing about 70% of the cookies. "This is all I have. Please tell me there's more." He seemed genuinely desperate. "There is more, but only at the third-floor confectionery in the Tycoon-free city across the sea." "No, then I guess I'll have to save them for later. My contractor will want to try them too." Almango's hands trembled in a superhuman effort to close the basket. "It's so adorable," Enya shouted unconsciously as the rest shrugged. Almango pretended to cough, embarrassed by all the attention. "I acted below my capabilities. If possible, please tell the owner of the Tycoon Bakery that these are the best cookies Almango has ever tasted. The baker has superhuman skills." Indeed, the baker was not human, but that information did not seem necessary. I'll make sure to relay the message. Good, good. So you are Jean Runcandle, the 1,000-year contractor mentioned by Soderette, is that right? Yes, sir. Prove it. Jean formed a fist-sized shadow energy orb in his hand, to which Almango nodded. It looks safe then. Honestly, I didn't think you'd survive and make it to me. With the trouble you caused against the Zipple even before becoming a flag-bearer and that bounty on your head, I was almost certain you wouldn't survive. Clamwell and Almango were well aware of the Holy Kingdom incident, as was everyone in Huffister. Soderette, my friend, you were right about what would come in 1,000 years. Look, Mr. God of Clams, we're busy. Okay? Why don't you give us the key? Murakan spoke with an attitude. He was quite irritated that Almango referred to Soderette as a friend. Murakan had never seen Soderette hang out with Almango before he fell into a long slumber. In fact, Almango's only known powers were the ability to keep the contractor's skin moist and the power to easily attract seafood. Additionally, contractors were granted the power to cook clams perfectly in any situation. This was why Murakan considered Almango a useless deity. It wasn't necessarily because Murakan was especially rude. Most people in the world regarded Almango as useless. This was why Clamwell, Almango's contractor, served tables in a remote tavern like this. From the looks of it, you must be Murakan, the Dark Dragon. Soderette was very concerned about you. Don't tell me he was concerned about me. He left the keys to Timar's tomb to gods like you or Pecan Minche without telling me anything about it. Soderette would have had his reasons, don't you think? Humph. Would you mind telling me some of those reasons? Then, Almango shook his head. His innocent-looking eyes annoyed Murakan. However, the dragon had no reason to hold it against the god of clams. But the rest of the companions could deduce from Murakan's anger that he was quite upset. In Pecan's case, they had all been very close 1,000 years ago, but Almango was just an ordinary god from Murakan's perspective. Well, anyway, I'm fed up with cookies, so I'm going to talk about the second tomb of the first Runcandle patriarch. By the way, Jean Runcandle? Yes. Do you intend to enter the tomb altogether? Jean looked surprised at Almango. Is that possible? I don't see why not. After all, it's just a tomb made to commemorate a person. Jean had never thought about entering the tomb with companions other than Murakan or Misha. Of course, it's quite a particular tomb, so you should be prepared to face its dangers. Its dangers. The phrase immediately related to the memory of the first tomb for Jean. If there was a guardian resembling one of the 10 knights like Sildare Runcandle, it was more than just dangerous. Jean didn't want to expose his companions to such dangers if he could avoid it. But he also understood that trusting his companions was the best way to show them respect. Everyone seemed willing to accompany him, whatever might happen. The companions were already determined. Lately, they had felt sorry for not being able to help Jean as much as before. Almango, do you know the guardian residing in the second tomb? I cannot answer your question. Why? All memories of the guardian have left me. I've tried to remember many times, but only a faint image comes to mind. Each of the 10 knights had been erased from history. But one thing is certain. The guardian must be tired because many great battles were fought when the Zipple plundered the tomb. The guardian of the first tomb, Sildare, materialized long after the Zipple plundered the tomb because it required the presence of the 1,000-year contractor to appear. In contrast, the guardian of the second tomb had been guarding the area since its creation. A bitter smile formed on Almango's lips as he tried to remember the forgotten guardian once more. Let's go. Jean and his companions followed Almango out of the tavern. It was an especially starry night. For some reason, it seemed as if the stars were shining to light their way. Almango stopped at the same beach where they had been swimming the past few days. Don't tell me the second tomb is right here. But it is. Almango waded into the water with a splash. Then he turned to look at the group and urged them to follow. Follow me in a straight line. Right at that moment, something astonishing happened. A path was forming on the water with each slow step Almango took. He walked on the sea as one walks on land. The spectacle was truly mysterious and befitting of a god. Obviously, none of them had ever walked on water before. Wow! He really must be a god, Lord Jean. I agree, sir. This jet is experiencing another wonder thanks to you, my lord. Look at all these gentle waves around us. This has to be the most magnificent sight I've ever seen. These are turning out to be truly wonderful vacations, young master. Even Quicantle was quite impressed by Almango's powers, although Murakan continued to grumble, muttering things like, "What's so special about walking on water?" They walked for an hour. The starry sky and the sea were all they could see around them, and the land was barely visible now. I guess it would be safe to open it right here. What do you mean by open? Weren't you supposed to give us the key? Almango showed his palms to Murakan at his question. My power is the key, Murakan. It happened right then. The sea suddenly split in front of Almango, as if two pieces of fabric were torn apart. Whoa, what's this? It's insane. What's happening? Now, even Murakan, who was doing his best not to be impressed, had to exclaim in amazement. His companions were no different. Even Jean was left in awe. The sea followed Almango's hands and formed waterfalls on both sides of the rift. No one would have ever believed that the god of clams could create such a miraculous scene. In fact, the opening of the sea was not the end. Holy gods! What is that? Jean and his companions looked down into the open trench under the sea. There was a clam. It must have been the only one of its kind in the world. The clam was indescribably massive and slimy. Yet there it was, opening its shell wide. It was the size of an entire castle. That was tough. It's been a while since I used my powers. Murakan, this is why Sodaret chose me. Not many beings in the world can handle seals of such scales. It almost seemed like his cookie madness had been nothing but a lie. The group, including Murakan this time, could only show their utmost respect for Almango. This was why the god of clams, Almango, was rumored to be a useless deity to the rest of the world. He had to make sure he always had energy saved because Almango's duty as a god was to use his powers to hide and safeguard the stories, which should only be shown to those who needed them at the required moment. It almost looked like a black pearl. A massive seal of shadow energy writhed inside the clam. The seal was the entrance to the second tomb of Timar. So, I hope you're not so upset about Sodaret anymore. Go on now, all of you. Thank you, Almango. I only did what I had to. Oh, and one more thing. Almango looked Jean in the eyes and continued, I don't remember who was inside, but please tell that guy he did a great job. I'll make sure to tell him. The group jumped into the shadow energy seal inside the clam one by one. Once they were all absorbed by the shadow energy seal, Almango's clam closed its giant shell. Once again, they found themselves in an ethereal plane created with shadow energy. But unlike the infinite darkness and emptiness of the first tomb, in the second tomb, there were traces of terrible battles everywhere. The place was littered with white skeletons presumed to be Zippel magicians from ancient times, and the corpses got in their way as they walked. However, when they touched the remains, they turned into ashes and fell. Oh wow! Everything had been so magical until now. This place is so desolate and unsettling, my lord. How many groups of skeletons are these? I can't even fathom how many enemies the Guardian must have faced on his own. Lord Jean. Jet and Kashmir spoke as they explored their surroundings. The group tried to figure out which direction to head when they heard a woman's voice in the distance. I knew I felt quite a ruckus from afar. Yes, I knew you'd come. The group immediately heightened their senses and turned their heads in the direction of the voice. Murakan immediately recognized the voice, just like the last time. Sarah? Sarah Runcandle, is that you, right? Murakan. Soon, the Guardian revealed herself. She wore armor similar to the Runcandle Guardian Knights, just like Sildaray, but her armor was torn and had holes everywhere. It wasn't just the armor. Her body was damaged as well. She had only one arm left, and the countless wounds on her body oozed shadow energy like it was blood. Why are you so late, you stupid dragon? The Guardian spoke upon meeting Murakan. Chapter 304, Timar's Second Tomb, 2. Her tone was oddly friendly. Unlike Sildare, who treated Mirakin like any tomb guardian would treat an intruder, the guardian of the second tomb greeted him like an old friend. Sarah. I heard her name on the recording device in the first tomb. She's the Runcandle who's supposed to have led 5 sorcery swords to the Tower of Tales, where 300 dragons had gathered. Sarah smiled as she looked at Mirakin. It was quite strange to see the smile along with all the shadow energy coalescing on her face like blood. Late? What are you talking about? I killed all those wretches before you arrived. To be precise, I swept them all with Fadler. You're late again, you know? Where have you been loafing around this time? Sarah. Fadler, that fool. He's injured. I'm fine as always. But that weakling is going to need some training from you and the Patriarch. Sarah. Wake up. Mirakin was about to shout, but Jean grabbed him by the shoulder. He tried to communicate through his gaze that the person before them wasn't the Sarah Mirakin knew, but only a guardian made in her likeness. The shadow, energy flowing instead of blood, was proof of this. Mirakin was being dragged into the same emotions that had tormented Jean when he slashed at his enemies in the Great Mitra Desert, even though he knew they were only mirages. The guardian was identical to Sarah Runcandle in every way. The way she spoke, walked, and even how she treated Mirakin. It was impossible to distinguish beings created from shadow energy from the real person, especially if they had been infused with the soul. Mirakin, why don't you answer my question? You're late already. You won't tell me you can't be bothered with such trifles, will you? It seems you've been fighting for too long, Sarah Runcandle. Quicantle stepped forward and spoke. She too remembered Sarah. The guardian stopped and directed her gaze at Quicantle. Oh, look who it is. Quicantle. I can't believe the spectator has finally decided to come to the battlefield. Although, of course, the battle is already over. Mirakin and Quicantle felt terrible. 1,000 years, that was the time during which the guardian had protected the second tomb in the dark ethereal plane all alone. Her scar-covered body and the thousands of skeletons surrounding the area were evidence of the terrible battles she had fought. In fact, the guardian's sword was broken, with only half of the blade remaining. The guardian couldn't distinguish past from present anymore, and at times, no longer remembered what her duty was. This very moment was a prime example of her state. She wasn't in her right state of mind. It was the price of all those years she waited after killing the Zippel magicians who intruded into the tomb 1,000 years ago. Who are these friends you brought? They're new faces. The guardian approached. Mirakin seemed to have made a decision. He transformed into his true form and spread his wings. Quicantle transformed right after him and unleashed the power of the silver dragon. My old comrade in arms, Sarah Runcandle. I apologize for being late. I will help you relieve the old burden you've been carrying. The guardian suddenly stopped at Mirakin's words. Upon closer inspection, the group could see that she was much more injured than they initially thought. If she had been bleeding instead of oozing shadow energy, just staying on her feet would have been a miracle in itself. What are you talking about all of a sudden? Take up your sword. What? Are you challenging me to a fight? Twisting tendrils of shadow energy began to spread behind Mirakin. Shadow energy release. The guardian must have known that Mirakin used this move against enemies he had to kill. This has got to be a joke, right? Jean and the others, listen up. She may be severely wounded, but remember, Sarah was always mentioned as the strongest of the 10 knights of the ancient Runcandle clan. You can't afford to face her without serious resolve, Mirakin said. They wondered if it was possible to fight in her current condition. Indeed, her sword was battered and damaged. However, she had managed to fight off thousands of magicians all by herself. All the members of the group drew their weapons. There was a brief silence between the group and the guardian. Soon, a great fighting spirit began to emanate from the guardian's body in the form of a tidal wave. I see. Mirakin, you bastard. You didn't arrive late. You deliberately waited for me to tire after the fight. A great light burst from Sarah's sword. If Mirakin hadn't covered the area with a veil of shadow energy, most of Jin's companions would have closed their eyes to shield themselves from the light. And if the guardian had been in perfect condition, Everyone who closed their eyes would have been slashed without exception. Sarah Runcandle's prowess at her peak was very close to divine star level. Don't tell me you've fallen for the spectator's trick. Or is it that you, despite your braggart ego, have also come to fear the Zipple? Everyone had their hopes on you, you dirty turncoat. Every word she spoke pierced Muraken's heart. Covered in shadow energy, Muraken's back had never looked smaller and fainter than it did now. Each encounter with his unforgettable past made Muraken feel like he was being stabbed with a sorrow deadlier than any blade. The Guardian raised her sword, which gleamed with an aura. It's better to get ready. Maybe I'm broken, and my own comrades have betrayed me. But remember, I am Sarah Runcandle. Whoosh! The sword flared with a new layer of fire that covered its aura. Blazing flames also appeared around Sarah, much like the shadow energy tornadoes around Muraken. Is that magic? She was a pure-blooded Runcandle who had lived before the days of the humiliating pact they had signed with the Zipple. She was a magic swordsman. Gilly, Elisa, and Kashmir, protect Enya and Jet. Jean, cover us, Quicantle shouted as she gathered energy for her breath. Muraken was already targeting the Guardian with thousands of nails formed from shadow energy. The nails fell to the ground without warning or sound. The massive amount of dark nails flew toward the severely wounded Guardian. But it only took one sword strike. That was all the Guardian needed to obliterate each and every nail that rained toward her. The broken sword posed no problem for her. Flames erupted fiercely from the sword and did not wane after eliminating the nails. She immediately created a sea of flames. The Guardian's flame could not only reduce its target to ashes but also cleave it in half. A blade-sharp fire. Strange as it sounded, the fire possessed qualities that truly fit the description. Shadow energy and fire intertwined in the air and continuously tried to consume each other. Quicantle breathed and used her divine power of time to occasionally contain the Guardian's flames. But there were too many flames. They outnumbered what Quicantle could contain with her powers. Stopping the flames on one side only led to another flame choking another part of the battlefield. It was an incredible sight. Despite her injuries, the Guardian's strength did not fall short in the face of the two dragons' power. Sarah Runcandle, the goddess of fire, that's what people called her 1,000 years ago. The long battle and loneliness might have limited her from unleashing her full power, and her name might have been completely lost to history because of the Zipple. But her flame still burned in the desolate ethereal plane. Muraken, what is this about? This can't be the extent of your powers. Are guilt and memories holding you back or something? The flames grew by the seconds, pushing back Muraken and Quicantle's powers as they invaded and expanded their territory. Or are you going easy on me out of sympathy? It's not that, Sarah. What is it then? If you've already decided to betray the Runcandles, don't beat around the bush, Sarah shouted as she leaped. Her strike forced Muraken to hastily deploy a shield barrier while Quicantle twisted her body to bite the Guardian. Sarah used her flames as support to maneuver freely. In the air, she hurled her sword forward. Sparks flew everywhere. The clash of the dragon's claws and teeth against the sword produced deafening noises, and the resulting shockwaves traveled through the ground, breaking the earth. A lightning bolt pierced through the flames and shadow energy. It was the sword of legends. A bolt. The abrupt strike made Sarah tremble. She then scanned the battlefield. This is the power of the legends. How does a Zipple possess this power? That boy is not a Zipple. He's a Runcandle. His name is Jean. He's a descendant of the Runcandles, the lineage you have successfully protected. Jean? Nobody is named that among the Runcandles. Sarah, 1,000 years have passed in the world outside of this plane. This is Timar's tomb, and we've come here as part of Sodaret's plans to dash. Perhaps I'm fatigued and weary, but that doesn't mean my mind has given in. It's only been 2 days since I arrived here with Fadler on orders from the Patriarch. Can't you see the countless corpses around? The Zipples will fall. Nothing less than by our own hands. Despite being the guardian of a tomb, she didn't seem to realize that. Timar was already dead. The Guardian was trapped in time, 1,000 years in the past when Timar led the Runcandle swordsmen. Back then, bringing honor to the Runcandle name stirred many hearts. It was cruel to witness. Granting her eternal rest as soon as possible was the only thing Jean and his companions could do for the Guardian. The Guardian descended to the ground and looked Jean in the eyes. "State your true name, Zipple boy." "I am Jean Runcandle, the 12th flag-bearer of the Runcandles. I gave you a chance, yet you continue to answer me with lies." "Yes, that's how the Zipples are. You try to paint the whole world with lies. Now, it seems you even covet the Runcandle name. Regardless of your opinion, Lady Sarah, my true name will never change. I have come to inherit the will of the ancient Runcandles, and I am Soderet's new contractor." Jean placed shadow energy over Sigmund, which was already filling with lightning energy. Sarah's eyes flickered. The shadow sword. She couldn't accept how Jean could wield shadow energy since Soderet could only grant power to Timar if he were still alive. But there was another way. She remembered there was another way to wield shadow energy without being Soderet's contractor. The witch. It must be her doing. Haluram, the eerie witch-like creature. According to Sarah's knowledge, the witch Haluram was the only being who could handle shadow energy without entering into a contract with Soderet. Whoosh! All the flames that had spread around the area converged back to Sarah. Seeing the flames' movements, Jean readied the shadow sword. "Today, right here, I will find my end. But in doing so, I will make sure to end you too," Sarah said. The Guardian's body burst into flames. Murakan immediately released all the shadow energy he could gather and covered the entire group. Likewise, Quickantle's gaze sharpened as she let out a roar. Sarah had initiated a secret sword technique of the ancient Runcandles. Chapter 305. Timar's Second Tomb 3. The witch's work? What does she mean by that? Is she implying that one can handle shadow energy without being Soderet's contractor through the powers of the witch? The name Haluram, the former owner of Shuri, flashed in Jin's mind. Of course, it was a bad time to ask about these things. Fire began to spout from the broken sword. Fiercely red points of flames spread in lines, and the lines stretched across a surface, quickly dyeing the entire dark ethereal plane red. The wounds Sarah had received over 1,000 years were no longer visible on her body. Instead of shadow energy, from where open scars had been before, flames burst forth, and soon her entire body was covered in flames. Even her hair, eyes, and nails turned into blazing fire. Finally, her sword lost all its steel properties and also turned into a sword-shaped flame. Everyone who had seen her in this terrifying form rightly called her the goddess of fire. Really? This is insane. The secret moves of the magic swords, sorcerer's swords, the fire of retribution? Even in that state, Murakan shouted. Until that moment, he felt pain every time. He saw the scars on the Guardian's body, and his heart ached every time she called him a traitor. But now it wasn't just a feeling. Things had become real. Murakan didn't believe the Guardian could perform any secret moves of the magic sword because she was too injured, despite her nearly divine skill. "Are you really going to kill us all? Stop whining, Murakan. Not only did you betray us, but you also dare to mock me? I know my feeble flames can never harm you." "No, it's not that." "Then what are you trying to say, you filthy traitor? I never betrayed you and I'm weaker now." Murakan's response never reached the Guardian's ears due to the sound of the bursting flames. Though even if she had heard the words, they wouldn't have made any difference anyway. 1,000 years and all the battles that occurred over time had taken a toll on the Guardian's body. They had also worn down her mind. She was unable to make a rational assessment of the situation, and even as she fought against Jin's group, she constantly saw and heard hallucinations. In her almost lunatic state, she could only blindly follow. The mission etched into her soul, to kill anything that threatened the Runcandles. She was entrusted with one more mission for Jin's sake, but the Guardian forgot her second objective in the countless battles she fought. It seemed like the flame was going to engulf the entire world. If it were Sarah in her prime and without injuries, it would be a literal description. The retribution fire she was now releasing barely contained 20% of the strength with which she incinerated the Zippel magicians 1,000 years ago. She had no choice. Her injuries prevented her from using all of her mana and aura, and she no longer had her former phoenix, Meunier. However, the Guardian's retribution fire easily pushed back Muraken's shadow energy and secured the battlefield. Flames and shadow energy intertwined and created grotesque patterns high in the sky of the ethereal plane. The entire plane swayed as if it could collapse at any moment, and the furious heat and shadow energy also restricted the flight patterns of the dragons. Quickhantle. I know. I'll try to stop it as much as I can. Grab the flames. Quickhantle's silver eyes shone as she descended. Zing, a sharp tone, resonated as a wave spread from Quickhantle's forehead. The wave carried the power of time. It was the same divine power that Quickhantle had used against Andre Zippel and Bayuretta, the Wind Dragon, in the past. Anything that came into contact with her rapidly spreading net-like wave lost its element of time. In Bayuretta's case, her entire body froze when the tip of her wing got caught in the wave. But the Guardian's flames only slowed down even when fully enveloped by the time wave, and they continued to spew infernal fire as they advanced. Quickhantle's powers weren't enough to completely halt the Guardian, which wouldn't have been different even if Ulta, the god of time, had manifested herself. The Guardian went further. She swung her fiery sword and cleaved the oncoming waves. The waves lost their strength after being cleaved and dissipated like loose threads. The Guardian was unable to neutralize all the waves that restrained her flames, but the fact that she could do so was astounding. The Guardian advanced. She cleaved the waves and approached Jean. However, her gaze remained fixed on Muraken. The Guardian was aware of Muraken's strength because she thought he was the only threat she would face. Indeed, that would have been true if the Guardian and Muraken had been at their best. Hey, spectator. Oh wait, I guess I can't call you that anymore. Anyway, Quickhantle, why don't you leave it be? If you keep fighting, you'll only embarrass that god of yours who's so concerned about his reputation and dignity. Quickhantle gritted her teeth. It wasn't that the Guardian's words wounded her ego. Quickhantle was using all the divine power she could muster. However, the Guardian neutralized her powers too easily. Earlier, the Guardian accused her own retribution fire of being tepid. But that was only by her own standards. Although the retribution fire spread a distance, the amount of heat it radiated through the shield barrier was enough to keep the group on alert. After Quickhantle's powers ran out, only Muraken, Quickhantle, and Jean with the reign of the King of Legends would be able to fight through the flames. Unfortunately, Jean hadn't recovered enough to execute the reign of the King of Legends, and he would have to risk permanent damage to his light heart if he pushed himself. Therefore, Jean had to ensure the battle was decided before Quickhantle's powers ran out. Quickhantle, how much longer do you think you can hold out? 5 minutes, Quickhantle replied tremblingly. The time was shorter than Jean had expected. Fortunately, he came up with a way. The barrier is melting even though Muraken and Quickhantle are protecting us from the flames before they reach us. I can't believe how powerful these flames are. Once Quickhantle's powers run out, we're sure to suffer severe damage. Jean, Gilly, Kashmir, Elisa, and Enya. In fact, even Jet was contributing. The 6 of them were casting shield barriers together. It seemed like they were protecting each other, but the martial artists' shield barriers were not really effective at protecting others. Enya? Yes, Lord Jean. I need to return to the battle. Once I leave the group, you have to shoulder the largest area of the shield barrier. Jean was currently playing that role. Unlike the other martial artists, Jean could use both aura and mana to cast shield barriers. Since he was the strongest in the group, it was the logical choice. But now, Enya had to assume Jin's role as the group's magician. Although Enya was still in the early stages of the 5-star level, the effectiveness of her shield barriers as a magician was far superior to that of the martial artists in protecting others. Do you think you can handle it? I'll try. I need you to be certain. If you can't do it, I must consider other options. Jean didn't intend to scold or pressure her, but he couldn't afford to risk his comrades' lives on uncertainty. If only the martial artists had been magicians of their respective levels, Jean wouldn't have needed to worry about them at all. Soon, Enya's eyes filled with determination. She nodded. I can do it, Lord Jean. But please, hold your current position for just 2 minutes while I cast a new spell. Enya recalled an old memory. It will take some time, but I'll manage on my own in the end. I don't want to keep being someone who constantly needs your protection, as it happened today. So, please, don't tell me not to worry about these things. I am Enya, Ulta's contractor. One day, I will become a great magician in whom you trust the most. That had been their conversation when they were eradicating the remaining forces of the dark magic guild. Jean remembered the same and smiled. Although she was not yet a great magician, Enya had made great progress while Jean was in La Ferosa. Her talent was certainly impressive. That's why Ulta, the god so picky about bloodlines, had to succumb and choose a commoner like Enya to be her contractor. All right, I got it. Enya sat down in a meditation position and deactivated her shield barrier. Naturally, this increased the burden on the rest of the group. Jean had to push his mana production to the maximum, running the constant risk of mana backlash. Enya's eyes twitched as she began casting the spell. The 2 minutes felt like centuries, but Enya managed to calm herself from the urgency and completed the steps skillfully without succumbing to the backlash. The spell she cast was something Jean had given her at the end of his days as a provisional flag-bearer. Extreme defense spells. Among the spells Chukon told her left as his legacy, the Dragonfire Barricade was the epitome of his extreme defense spells. The runic character for extreme defense began to shine on Enya's shoulder. You can go now, Lord Jean. Enya gave a thumbs up, despite the blood oozing from her mouth. A blue barrier began to form around her. The Dragonfire Barricade. Like its namesake, it was a spell created by Chukon to fight against dragons. The barrier was meant to protect the caster from dragon breath. Although Enya had not yet fully mastered it, she used Ulta's powers to compensate for the lack of mana. I'll leave this to you then. He only had about 3 minutes left. Jean exited the barrier. He also had a spell already cast. Simultaneous casting. The skill that made Jean a magician above all others. While replacing Enya in the shield barrier, Jean cast another spell, along with the Shadow Blade he was already casting. It was the spell that meant doom for anyone using magic. Inverted Sky, Kiddard Hall's Heritage. Dame Sarah's mana is only around 8 stars right now. The Retribution Fire tore through Murakan's shadow energy like paper and sliced through Quicantel's divine powers like they were thin strings. However, the mana behind it was only about 8 stars. It was the 9-star aura that added to the 8-star mana and Runcandle's magical sword's unique powers that magnified his prowess to such extremes. Jean knew that it would undoubtedly cause a mana backlash. Of course, there was no sure way to know if it would work. Given the person Sarah was, she might be able to retaliate against the Inverted Sky, even in her current state and despite that enormous spell. That's why he also prepared the Shadow Blade. Jean had learned new Shadow Blade techniques from the Battle Kings of La Ferosa while he was there, and he chose to execute the 2nd and 7th techniques. The Scissors and Shadow Assault. Even if she falls into a backlash, I'll only have one shot. No matter how injured Dame Sarah is. Engaging her in close combat without the reign of the King of Legends is suicide. Mana left Jin's hand and formed the Inverted Sky Orb. Once the Inverted Sky was completed, the shadow at Jin's feet rose and joined its master. Chapter 306. Timar's Second Tomb. 4. He became one with the shadow. His body turned black, dark but dim. It was as if a shadow occupied his place. Like a specter. It seemed like one could pass through it with their hand. The guardian shivered. She stopped abruptly. It was due to the powers of the Inverted Sky. If it had been any ordinary technique, Jean would never have been able to induce a backlash, even if the guardian had only 5 stars of mana instead of her 8 stars of magical prowess. However, the Inverted Sky was a grand spell that challenged everything magicians understood about backlash, even in the current era. Therefore, it was no wonder that the spell appeared even more mysterious to the Guardian, whose days dated back 1,000 years. Is it a secret move of the Zipples? An impressive spell for your age. Her fiery eyebrows furrowed. The Guardian seemed quite disturbed by the inverted sky. She stood still and couldn't take her eyes off the spell. A part of the mana composing the retribution fire broke off and formed into a ribbon. It was then gradually absorbed by the inverted sky orb. Now, with another spell pressing down on her divine time powers, the Guardian could no longer move freely. She had been continuing the battle of forces against Mirakan all this time, with shadow energy and flames. These two forces were constantly pushing each other on all sides of the battlefield in an attempt to gain more territory. But despite the various attacks thrown at her, the Guardian still had the upper hand in the battle against Jean and his companions. Even though she was just standing there, none dared to approach. It made no sense. The fact that she could unleash such powers with only 8 stars of mana and 9 of aura was a complete mystery, even if the powers of the ancient run candles were taken into account. Jean and his companions should have had much greater power than the Guardian. But she was a pure-blooded run candle from the days before the pact. Her very existence was an anomaly in itself. Moreover, she had been one of the most powerful figures among those anomalies. Please, I hope Lady Sarah regains her sanity before the battle ends, even if only for a brief moment. Jean tightened his grip on the sword. Dark shadows emerged from Jean and painted the ground black. It was a massive shadow. It split into several shadows and swiftly slid towards the Guardian. In an instant, they completely surrounded the Guardian. The Guardian immediately sent waves of flaming swords towards the shadows. But how could physical blows be dealt to shadows? They only flickered momentarily and continued to occupy the ground around them in all their darkness. The 7th maneuver of the Shadow Blade was the Shadow Assault. The maneuver was a move designed to strike the enemy in a way unique to Shadow Blade wielders. No one could attempt to replicate this move without wielding shadows, no matter how powerful the swordsman. Jin's frail body shot forward. The sight of Jin's dark and semi-transparent body charging forward would have been enough to possess anyone who had not reached a certain mastery. He shot forward so quickly that it almost seemed like a wave of dark blades had been fired, not a moving body. Despite the speed, it didn't take the Guardian long to prepare to strike Jin. In fact, she knew exactly what path his sword would take as Jin started to move. Jin came within range. Each of his swords traced a trajectory. The Guardian's sword was faster. Setting aside the total amount of aura and her injuries, the Guardian's swordsmanship was already at a transcendent level. The flaming swords and shadow energy clashed. Or at least it appeared they clashed. The Guardian's sword only cut through the air, and Jean disappeared completely from her sight. In his place, the Guardian found Sigmund, who was now behind her. The dark Sigmund pointed at her back. But it was Jin's companions who were surprised by this move. Had Lord Jin teleported? His companions couldn't explain it any other way since Jin had clearly been charging towards the Guardian when he suddenly vanished and reappeared wielding his sword from her back. They weren't entirely wrong to think it was teleportation. Jin had been able to dissipate into the air through the 5 shadows surrounding the Guardian. The shadows served as a kind of gate. They allowed Jin to enter and exit the shadows once he executed the 7th maneuver of the Shadow Blade, the Shadow Assault. Jin concealed himself in the shadow that was in front of the Guardian at the moment of collision and reappeared through the shadow behind her to wield his sword. An assault. It was unpredictable and devastating. Such was the move one could perform when they could become the very shadow. Jin's sword grazed the Guardian's back. It scraped the surface of the fire, covering her body like a piece of leather. She was one of the 10 great knights. The fact that her flames were bound by the divine power of time didn't matter. Nor did the fact that she was battling for territory against Mirakan, or that her mana fluctuated involuntarily due to the inverted sky. Anyway, Jin never expected to strike her with the first blow. Yes, the Shadow Blade had those moves. How unsettling to see you using the Patriarch's techniques. Jin no longer bothered to tell her that he wasn't a Zippel. The circumstance of the misunderstanding was inconsequential. Jin decided that there was only one way to converse with that old heroine whose mind was no longer stable. It had to be through the sword. Unlike the time with Sir Sildaray, there's a problem here, but Lady Sarah still plays a part in Soderet's plans. as long as she fulfills the conditions of the inheritance. The same thing that happened in the first tomb will occur. The various trials that Soderet had left for his sake all shared the same solution. Willpower, the most sacred virtue upheld by martial artists, or perhaps all humans. The way forward always revealed itself once Jean could demonstrate his willpower. It happened when he first faced the principles of the Shadow Blade. It was no different in the Great Mitra Desert and the first tomb of Timar. There was no reason for this occasion to be any different. Jin's sword clashed against the Guardians from 5 different directions. Jean didn't have to twist his body because he could freely move through the 5 shadows. On the other hand, the Guardian had to frantically block Sigmund. But despite her frenzied movements, the Guardian's eyes remained as firm as a rock. The exchange of moves grew faster. Their techniques simplified with each clash. Instead of extravagant maneuvers, they fought each other with the depth of their most basic moves. Which sword technique was deeper? Obviously, the Guardians. Mastery, experience, skill, and integration. Aside from the divine element of talent and potential, Jin's sword skill was inferior to the Guardians in every aspect. It's a shame, young one. If you had been born a Runcandle, you could have been a hero who saved the world. The shadows surrounding the Guardian slowly moved away from her. It was an indication that Jean was being pushed back. Jin's companions clearly saw what was happening, but they could only lament that they couldn't do anything to intervene. Quickantle's divine power of time was rapidly approaching its limit. Now, he would barely be able to contain the fire of vengeance for a minute, and it was already starting to give way. Things weren't going any better on Muraken's side. With each decrease in time constraints, the fire of retribution grew stronger. Therefore, the balance of power was breaking. However, Jean wielded his sword undaunted. Unlike his desperate companions, Jean waited for the opportune moment as he carefully observed the changes in mana when the fire of retribution roared to life again. Now that the time restraint had weakened, the flame was showing its full power again. But the mana forming the fire of retribution was no longer as dense as before. There was a shift in the flow of the Guardian's mana. Obviously, it was due to the inverted sky. If she had started in perfect condition, she would have been able to maintain the fire of retribution while controlling the mana reflux caused by the inverted sky. But now she couldn't. No one except Jean realized that the fire of retribution had become less dense. Everyone was too busy preparing for the impact of Runcandle's magical sword secret technique when it roared to life again. But Jean could see it as a magician. The fire of retribution broke when I unleashed the inverted sky. It clings to it forcibly, but its backlash will begin soon. The Guardian didn't seem to be affected at all in her fight, so the rest had no idea that she would fall into a backlash. Of course, the onset of a backlash wouldn't nullify all of Sarah's skill. She was confident that she would reign in her unruly mana before it worsened and resume the battle as if nothing had happened. There was only a moment, a fraction of a second, when she would expose an opening due to the mana backlash. Once Lady Sarah slows down to correct the backlash in her, that's when I must strike. If I fail, I'm unlikely to have that opportunity again. The shadows born from the 7th maneuver of the Shadow Blade now formed a circle twice as large as it had originally been. That was the distance Jean had been pushed back by the Guardian. The Guardian had to face multiple enemies at once. Similarly, Jean had to monitor the various effects caused by the Guardian simultaneously. He had to stop his attacks, check the flow and density of mana, observe the path of her flames, and calculate the remaining time until her backlash began. There were only about 20 seconds left until the time constraints would break. And at that very moment, Jean finished his calculations. 5 seconds left, until the Guardian's backlash would start. 1, 2, 3, cuff. The Guardian abruptly vomited a lump of black shadow energy from her mouth. Jin's calculations were precise. Jean finally took his first step forward since they had closed in. He closed in on her with the trick he intended to bring her down with. He had concealed it under the pretext of the shadow assault all this time. Sheik, the dark blade struck towards the Guardian's heart. It was the first real crisis she had faced in the hundreds of sword moves they had exchanged. But even as she struggled to tame her backlash, she showed the monstrous feat of successfully reacting to Jin's sword. Her flaming sword struck upward and stopped Sigmund. Jin's trick seemed to have failed in the end. And it certainly would have been a failure if Jin had only struck the Guardian with a single sword. Oh! The Guardian jumped back to create distance from Jin. A dark and menacing blade was buried in her chest, and shadow energy sprouted from the wound. Sarah knew that Jin would achieve his decisive move once she fell into a backlash. If he hadn't, even a master like her wouldn't have been able to stop the final sword strike. Haha! Looks like you've got me. The second maneuver of the Shadow Blade. This was the trick Jin had intended from the beginning. It was the one thing Sarah couldn't predict. The moment he struck with Sigmund, the scissor blade pierced her heart. The Guardian felt her vision darkening. She could tell that her desolate and agonizing mission as a Guardian was finally coming to an end. She also realized the mistake she had been making, but the battle against the boy standing before her, the same lineage that she and her comrades had managed to protect from the Zippels, was not yet over. Do not hesitate now. Go and finish it, Jin Runcandle. The Guardian spoke. Jin approached her with swift steps and thrust his sword forward. It has been an honor, Lady Sarah Runcandle. Sigmund pierced her chest this time. She fell to one knee with a smile on her face. Chapter 307. Timar's Second Tomb. 5. Jin drew his sword. He could feel the eerie sensation of bones and organs caught in the blade. The retribution fire that burned throughout the area began to quickly subside as the Guardian fell. All her flames vanished as if they had never existed. They left behind small hot embers that scattered in the wind like flower petals. The flames surrounding the Guardian's body also diminished. Shadow energy flowed from the countless wounds on her body. The Guardian's breathing was quite rapid, but it soon slowed as she decided to accept her own death. Sarah! Murakan landed on the ground in haste and transformed into his human form. He had been forced to fight her, but that didn't change the fact that Sarah was an old friend and comrade in arms for Murakan. It wasn't Sarah herself, but only a Guardian created in her image. Nevertheless, there were traces of Sarah Runcandle's soul in the Guardian. It was torment for Murakan to see the Guardian find her end, even though he had fought with Jin and the others to grant her this very rest. Quicantle took on his human form and landed beside Murakan. He bit his lower lip. He seemed to have mixed feelings about it. Murakan. Yes, it's me. I'm Murakan. Damn it. Did it really have to come to this? Did you really have to come to your senses like this? His emotions were evident in his trembling voice. Murakan bent down and took the Guardian's hand. It was cold. It was hard to imagine that she had wielded such a large fire with her injured body just moments ago. You stupid lizard. You and the new contractor. The Guardian stopped at that moment. The mention of the new contractor reminded her of something she had long forgotten. That Timar had died, and the splendor of the ancient Runcandles had disappeared from history. That Murakan had only come to her side after all this time, and the people witnessing her long-standing battle coming to an end were not Runcandle swordsmen, but the Silver Dragon spectator and a handful of unfamiliar faces. Fortunately, you were strong enough to defeat me in my weakened state. Sarah, what happened? How did Timar die 1,000 years ago? Why did Sodaret create tomb guardians from the knights? And what do the Zippels gain by raiding Timar's tombs? Why did Sodaret leave you with this story without telling it to Misha or me? What things were they not telling me back then, and why? Murakan didn't dare to ask Sarah these things. He didn't believe he deserved to. No matter what had happened, the guilt of not being with his comrades pierced his soul like a knife. Above all, Murakan was no longer Timar's guardian dragon. The ancient Runcandles were not under his command. Now it was Jin's task to find the truth according to Sodaret's plans. Murakan's role was to serve Jin as his guardian dragon. All this time you've had to bear this burden alone. I'm sorry. He expected to hear strong reprimands like the time with Sildare. But the Guardian looked directly into Murakan's eyes and said something he didn't expect. Just as we had our pains, I'm sure you had yours too. There's no need to apologize. Murakan didn't reply. He just held Sarah's hand tightly. But Quicantle, I'm quite surprised you're here. I thought you and your god sought neutrality. Was there a change of plans? The Guardian's mind returned, but her betrayal against Quicantle hadn't changed. Just like you, the Runcandles follow Timar's orders to the letter. I cannot disobey Olta's will. Yes, I'm sure you had no choice, being a dragon. I understand to some extent. But remember that the Patriarch, my own brother, was a man who would have risked his life at any time if it were for your sake. Jin's eyes widened at the mention that Timar was his brother. Sarah Runcandle was Timar's younger sister. I sincerely hope that your proud god doesn't stand idly by in the battles that boy will have to face. Like Murakan, Quicantle couldn't respond. However, Sarah actually didn't despise or detest Quicantle, despite how betrayed she felt. But I must thank you for one thing. Thanks to you, I was spared the possibility of killing Murakan and that boy with my own hands. It was as she described it. Without Quicantle's powers, Jin would never have been able to bring down the Guardian. The Guardian looked into Jin's eyes. Jin Runcandle. Yes, Lady Sarah. This is my first defeat in a long time. From my weariness in the ancient battle that persisted for far too long, I have mistreated you. Since you alone have guarded this place for 1,000 years, I wouldn't say it has been mistreatment. The skeletons of the ancient magicians that once filled the ethereal plane were no longer there. They had all been swept away by the retribution fire and reduced to ashes, disappearing afterward. Jin's companions, who had shielded themselves behind a barrier, rushed toward him. They didn't share any memories with Sarah like Murakan or Quicantle, nor did they feel indebted as descendants like Jin. However, they couldn't harbor hostility towards Sarah, who had moments ago tried to kill them. They didn't need to be told what she must have endured over the centuries. In truth, they felt rather helpless and realized they had to strive harder if they wanted to fight alongside Jin. I'm glad you say that, Jin, my descendant from future centuries. Please go on. What are the Runcandles like in the present? I would say they don't measure up to the days I didn't have the privilege to experience. I suppose the Zipples still control the world? Jin nodded. The Guardian could feel the chill of impending death as shadow energy continuously flowed out of her body. A hoarse whisper escaped her trembling lips. We've left you with a heavy burden. Becoming Sodaret's contractor and inheriting my ancestors' legacy always seemed like opportunities, not burdens. So, I hope you don't feel that way. He spoke sincerely. Compared to the pitiful past life he had experienced, this was a blessing in itself. Jin was also not blindly inheriting the will of the Runcandles. He was only moving forward into new frontiers of his second life with his own will. It seems you have a talent for making others feel better. Come closer. Come closer. The Guardian couldn't see Jin, even though he was right in front of her. She had become completely blind. Gilly patted Murakan on the shoulder as Enya took Quicantle's hand. I, Sarah Runcandle, guardian of Timar Runcandle's tomb, now pass my inheritance to Jin Runcandle. Jin nodded. At that moment, runic characters began to form over the Guardian's body. Runic characters? They lit up all over Sarah's body, over the place where her missing arm should have been, and also over the pierced chest. The runic characters contained the secret technique of Runcandle's magical swordplay that Sarah Runcandle had created throughout her life. It was the retribution fire of Sarah Runcandle. It was not part of Sodaret's plans for Jin. The Guardian was transferring it to Jin of her own volition. The runic characters left Sarah's body, like a soul departing from a deceased, and were absorbed by Jin's body. The runic characters also conveyed Sarah's memories of creating the retribution fire with each character etched into Jin's body. It was akin to the memory transfer of the legends he had experienced from Boraz, the Fifth Battle King, or the inheritance spell from the historians. I had hoped someone worthy of this sword technique would come along. I suppose one of my small hopes has come true. Unlike the other runic characters that Jin had on his body, those of the Guardian were not visible all the time. They only lit up when activating the retribution fire. This is a gift beyond what I could have ever expected. Not as great as the solace you've given me. Thanks to you, I have finally earned my eternal rest. Sarah's body disintegrated into particles of shadow energy. The shadow energy that flowed in place of blood now floated in the air like fine dust, enveloping Jean. Jean would soon be transported to another layer of the ethereal plane, one that held old stories just like with Silderay. Are there any final words you'd like to leave, Lady Sarah? I hope all of you won't suffer too much. She said all of you, rather than just you. Murakan and Quicantle shivered and clenched their teeth at her words. They would have preferred to hear her resent them for arriving too late. But she didn't speak such cruel words in her farewell. Instead, she left one last brief comment about the 1,000 years of her desolate battles. I will finally be reunited with my brother and my comrades. Soon. The Guardian's body completely disintegrated into particles of shadow energy. Jean and his group observed a moment of silence for her. The shadow energy created a gentle whirl, and a sound began to emit. I will briefly disappear into another ethereal plane. Do not be alarmed and wait for my return. He heard a voice in the distance, just like the other time. Mu, S, Sa, of, Mu, Sa. Despite the unclear words, Jean knew whose voice it was. It was Murakan's voice. None of his companions could hear the voice. Jean quickly turned to look at Murakan, but he didn't seem to hear his own voice from the past either. Only Jean could detect it. The sound resonated as shadow energy completely surrounded Jean. The particles of shadow energy then disappeared, leaving his companions looking dazed at the spot where Jean and Sarah had been. When Jean opened his eyes again, he found himself in an empty darkness reminiscent of the first tomb. An ethereal plane within another ethereal plane. But unlike the first tomb, this plane was clearly damaged. There were countless gruesome gashes in the darkness, and the entire plane shook as if there had been an earthquake. Additionally, the ominous noise created in the destruction of the ethereal plane constantly grated on his eardrums. Just as Sarah had been injured in her long battle, the ethereal plane within her had also been destroyed. Jean intuitively understood how ethereal planes worked. He advanced toward the source of the voice in search of the recording device left by Soderette. Soon, a giant orb shining in gray caught his attention. Murakan's voice became clearer as he approached the orb. We must stop him. We must stop him, Sarah Runcandle. Murakan and Sarah were speaking in the scene from a 1,000 years ago displayed by the orb. Both were covered in blood, as if they had just come from battle, and their clothes and armor were torn in several places. Sarah glared at Murakan. What do you mean by stop him? Are you telling me we have to kill the patriarch? You, out of all people, talking about abandoning the patriarch? Murakan didn't respond. He only brought his hand to his forehead in a display of weariness. Chapter 308. Fragment from the Past. Sarah 1. Jean opened his eyes wide. What did that mean? In the scene replayed by the orb, Murakan was saying something Jean never expected Murakan to say. Silence fell. Sarah's eyes trembled with fury as she stared at Murakan. A murderous intent filled her eyes, but Murakan remained unfazed. Abandoning the patriarch. Yes, I've heard you've been going around saying those things to others. It was the execution branch swordsman who told me, and Fadler also told me something similar. Sarah spat blood and continued. I thought it was a misunderstanding, since they don't know you like I do. Or maybe, I just thought they were babbling nonsense because they're tired of this long battle. Sarah approached Murakan and grabbed him by the neck. But to think I would hear it in your own words, that you would actually propose killing the patriarch. Are you serious? Do we really have to kill the patriarch? You're supposed to be his dragon guardian. Sarah. Answer me, Murakan. Take a look around you. Sarah glanced around the place. There were corpses all around her. They were the consequences of their battle. The dismembered bodies were filled with Runcandle black swords and Zippel dragon crests. More than half of the dead magicians were killed by Timar. If we hadn't reinforced our forces, things would have turned against us. The Zippels probably would have won this battle. What are you trying to say? I arrived on the battlefield before you did. It means, unlike you, I was able to see Timar fight. He killed more than just Zippel magicians today. Are you trying to tell me the Patriarch killed our own knights? Murakin nodded slowly. Sarah released her grip on his neck. She glanced around once more to inspect the bodies of the deceased. She seemed to be examining the particular slashing wounds. Soon, she noticed something about the fallen friendly forces. No, in fact, she realized that most of the friendly casualties had been killed by Timar's swords. Anyone who died by his sword bore a notable mark. Sarah, he's going mad. Timar is no longer the man we thought he was. Murakin spoke after a long silence. No, that's not true. The Patriarch is... Don't deny it. You knew it too. Nonsense. How long do you think you can keep deluding yourself? You don't want to face the truth. I know because I was like that too. But you also saw Timar stab friendly troops in the last battle. He tried to stab Fadler but managed to pull back in time. The Patriarch is human, Murakin. The endless, desperate battles briefly made him lose his composure. That's all. Will you keep turning a blind eye to these dead knights? Sarah shook her head. There must be a reason why the Patriarch killed them. Murakin, what do you want us to do if we can't trust the Patriarch? I know better than anyone how hard it is to accept. But we must keep our eyes on the truth, even if it's for his sake. The truth, Sarah shouted. She sounded as if she were furious, but she was actually starting to cry. The truth remains that the Patriarch is the person we believe he is. Murakin, there must be a reason why he killed them. Sarah, these knights must have been under the mind control of Zippel's spells. You know it. You know how they manipulate people's minds. We must trust the Patriarch. Do you truly believe that? Or maybe they were spies. I'm sure they must have been spies. And that's why Timar killed them himself. Murakin slapped Sarah on the cheek. Her eyes unfocused. She looked up at the sky. Don't mock the fallen knights. They died fighting for the Run Candles, for Timar, for you, and for the other clan members, to prevent the world from falling under Zippel's control. How dare you mock them when you're supposed to be one of the 10 knights? Tears filled Sarah's eyes. She regretted her words, but she couldn't take them back now. Sarah knelt down and hugged the bodies of the friendly casualties on the battlefield. She seemed lost and didn't know what to do. Murakin watched Sarah for a while until he silently embraced her. What has turned the Patriarch into this? You know what it is, don't you? You know what is driving the Patriarch mad. Tell me what it is, he said. The gray orb replaying the scene distorted. The screen rapidly flickered between blurry and clear images. Jean could no longer see them clearly, nor could he understand their conversation. We're back again. He had experienced something similar in the first tomb. Jean expected it. Since the ethereal space itself was already destroyed, he knew the recording device was also in jeopardy. He could only hope for the orb to stabilize. I had the same thing happen with the shadow energy pearl count I got in the first tomb and also with the recording device from the tomb. They all seemed to be damaged. The recording device was like a broken wind-up clock. It played back an event from 1,000 years ago without any issues until it had problems at the most crucial moment. According to the recording device, Murakin decided that Timar had gone mad and tried to kill him. This seemed to be the reason why Sir Sildare sounded hostile toward Murakin. Jean knew he had to find Misha as soon as possible, as she might know something about these recording devices. Ssh. The scene from the gray orb cleared again. But, just like in the first tomb, it now showed a different scene. Murakin and Sarah were no longer on a battlefield filled with Run Candle and Zippel corpses. They were in a desolate place filled with demonic creatures. The Dark Sea. He knew it at a glance. There was no place as black and desolate as the Dark Sea in the entire world. But one strange thing stood out. Why is there a tower in the Dark Sea? He wasn't sure where he was, but he could see a tall tower in the distance from where Murakin, Sarah, and someone unfamiliar to him stood. The tower no longer existed in the Dark Sea. The man spoke. Murakin and Sarah called him Fadler. The three of them gazed at the distant tower in silence for a while. Dark smoke continuously rose from the top of the tower. It was shadow energy. It didn't look benevolent at all. The shadow energy emanating from the top of the tower seemed to carry malevolent energy. Fadler let out a deep sigh. Murakin, is this the only way? Murakin didn't respond. Fadler continued. Honestly, I don't feel right about this. Timar has weakened. In fact, I won't have any trouble defeating him myself. The only reason I brought you here is because… That's not what I meant. I'm not sure if this is right. Killing the Patriarch with our own hands. Don't you think it's cruel? Both for the Patriarch and for us. Don't doubt it now, Fadler. You're already here. Do you think I would have chosen to kill him if I could have chosen? There's no way to describe how anguished I feel. This is hard for me too. Murakin's eyes were red as he turned to look at Fadler. There hasn't been a single day worse than this in my 2,000 years of existence. Can you even imagine it? What must a dragon guardian feel when killing their own contractor? I can't even end my life in anguish like you humans. If I could, I would also take my own life after killing him. Murakin paused and clenched his teeth. The ground of the dark sea trembled beneath them. The shadow energy pouring from the tower exerted pressure over the entire area. There wasn't a single demonic creature in sight. They had all fled, like beasts instinctively hiding from calamities. Murakin, but you must know this, Sarah spoke up. Murakin didn't turn to look at her. If I were in your position, the Patriarch, no, my brother, would never have abandoned you. I know that too. You say it as if it were for his own good. But both you and your God are making the choices that benefit you the most. The cursed thing is that we have no choice but to follow that choice. Sarah began to walk forward. The other two followed her. Their footsteps left marks on the murky ground of the dark sea. The area grew darker and gloomier as they neared the tower. The shadow energy from the tower spewed more deadly toxic fumes than anything else in the dark sea. When they reached the entrance of the tower, all three had to cast their best shield barriers. Murakin transformed into his true form and released his shadow energy. The giant tower was hollow on the inside. There was a spiral staircase in the center. The three didn't speak as they climbed the steps. Soon they reached the top of the tower. The three looked at Timar, who stood in the center. There were dark patches all over Timar's body, as if he had been riddled with a disease. Timar saw them approach, but he didn't move at all. Brother. Timar didn't speak. I am here, brother. Why are you alone in this desolate place? Hope surged within Sarah when Timar didn't react at all. Maybe her beloved brother wasn't insane, or maybe there was a way to make things right now. Sarah's eyes widened. She nodded. Yes, it's me. I'm Sarah. Do you recognize me? Can you? Come here. It's cold. Sarah gave a big smile and tried to approach Timar. But Murakin held her shoulder. Don't get closer to him. Let go of me. Once you're within his reach, he'll attack you. I said, let go of me. Damn it, Sarah. Please listen to me. Look at all the shadow energy swirling around Timar. Can't you see those blade-like things protruding from it? He formed them to cut you, Sarah. Fadler closed his eyes. He had been aware of the shadow energy weapons from the moment he saw Timar. Therefore, he had to admit the fact. The Patriarch was insane. As far as Fadler knew, Timar would never retaliate even if his only sister decided to stab him in the back. But now, that same man was trying to lure Sarah so he could kill her. Fadler drew his sword. A lightning-coated blade emerged from its sheath, illuminating the area. I am Fadler Runcandle of the 10 Knights. I received the name of Runcandle from you, Patriarch, and have enjoyed the infinite honor of your privilege. I will attack you now, Patriarch, but I will regret doing so, even in death. Then, a grotesque smile bloomed on Timar's face. Chapter 309. Fragment from the Past. Sarah 2. It's a shame. Timar's eyes turned black with shadow energy. Sarah made up her mind when she saw what was happening. She had to strike down her brother. A flame-covered sword left its sheath. Sarah's eyes filled with an iron will. Now that she had decided to end him, she wanted to do it in the least painful way possible. She could worry about mourning and sadness afterward. Blades shot out from the shadow looming behind Timar. Sarah and Fadler wielded their swords to block the attack as Timar formed a sword in his hand. It had the shape of Balasada, but it wasn't genuine. It was just a counterfeit formed with shadow energy. The man wielding the counterfeit sword was not the Timar that all three remembered. He was a monster who couldn't even recognize his loved ones. Dark waves of shadow energy emanated from Timar's dark sword. Each one carried tremendous power, but they were pathetic compared to Timar in his true form. Murakan spread his wings. Timar's thick shadow energy, which filled the entire tower, stopped immediately like a beast freezing in the presence of a giant predator. This Murakan, the one who faced Timar in his madness, was the dark dragon at the peak of his power 1,000 years ago. People used to say that Murakan and Timar were evenly matched in battle, even under Timar's best conditions. There was no way Timar could contend with Murakan in his madness. In addition to that, Sarah and Fadler also joined Murakan. Two different elemental manas of flames and lightning intertwined with their auras to form waves of multicolored blades. They extended with a force powerful enough to slice through the entire tower. Murakan restrained Timar with shadow energy, while Sarah and Fadler reached his two flanks and pressed him. Each of their strengths intertwined with the steel and kept clashing. They were terribly surprised to see Timar retreating and barely fending off their sword strikes. This couldn't be the power represented by the Titan Timar Runcandle. "I'm sorry, Timar." Murakan gathered all his released shadow energy, indicating that this would end soon. All the shadow energy around him surged like waves and enveloped Murakan. At that moment, the sky above the tower filled with shadow energy, and even the skies of the dark sea in the distance fell under Murakan's control. The poisonous vapors descending from the dark sea's atmosphere were covered with his shadow energy and dissipated. His powers lived up to the name people of the time called Murakan, the Sky King. "Sarah, Fadler, it's time to end this." But Murakan's words were met with a twist. A steel dimensional gate opened right in front of Timar. A man with a faint form stepped out of the gate. His translucent body emitted a bright light. His abrupt appearance caused Sarah and Fadler to step back and remain on guard. Murakan also halted his attack. Fate seems quite cruel at times, doesn't it? And so does your god. Don't you agree, Murakan? Demon, how did you know about this place? What brought you here? There aren't many things in the known world that I don't know, as long as they haven't been erased and remain unchanged. You already know that. He seemed familiar to Murakan. Sarah and Fadler also seemed to know him. About Timar. I suppose you all wish to save this pitiable companion. He spoke, placing his hand on Timar's shoulder. Timar stayed still and didn't act hostile toward him, although the weight of Murakan's shadow energy seemed to press him and make him gasp for breath. Sarah and Fadler's eyes trembled. What is this plan? Murakan glared at him. Plan? I'm just offering goodwill to the pitiful orphans, as someone very troubled with overflowing fortunes. Cut the nonsense and leave before I end up killing you too. Murakan directed his murderous intent towards him. But Sarah and Fadler stepped in front of Murakan and shook their heads. Their desperate eyes pleaded with the dragon to listen to him. They seemed to have faith that he could offer them a way to pull Timar back from his madness. Don't be so hostile now. At least listen to my offer, dear old friend. I've prepared a future that will benefit all of us. The gray orb distorted again. It didn't seem like it would recover. Just like in the first tomb, the orb was breaking down after the scene change. But Jean was hardly irritated by the abruptly interrupted scene. His heart was already beating too fast from the shock of seeing him towards the end of the scene. Jean had already faced him once. The leader of the Kinzalo. It was clear it was him. The translucent body, the flowing light from him, his way of speaking, his voice, and even the steel dimensional gate. He also sounded like he knew Murakan back then. In fact, he sounded like he knew Murakan very well. But unlike in the old Otirium time, Murakan acted as if he also knew him. What's going on here? If Murakan knew him, why was he acting like he didn't know him? Jean thought about it, but he quickly corrected himself. No, he probably wasn't acting. Murakan might not know who he is now. Something was amiss in Murakan's memory. It wasn't too hard to deduce. He suddenly remembered the conversation he had overheard in Oterium toward the end of his days as a provisional flag-bearer. When Timar tried to kill you after you lost control due to the overload, I was the one who stopped that guy. Murakan, don't you remember who I am? You bastard. Whose name are you trying to throw out here? You seem to be an old demon, but there's no way Timar would have associated with people like you. And an overload? You must have found out something. Huh? The one who lost control that day was not you but Timar? Is that what you're trying to say? Forget the fact that you don't recognize me. To think that you remember that day was Timar's fault. I can't even imagine how disappointed the late one would be if he ever found out. Bring up Timar's name one more time, and I'll kill you and send all those folks called Kinzalo to hell. That would have been impossible for you, even in your best condition. But I'm curious. Have you really lost your memory? Do you really believe it was Timar who lost control? Not you? You're courting death. Or have you rearranged your memory in a more convenient way for you? Shut your mouth. That was the conversation between Murakan and the Kinzalo leader. Ever since he heard the exchange, Jean had often wondered what might have happened between Murakan and Timar 1,000 years ago, and also about what his dragon's relationship with the Kinzalo leader could be if they really had known each other in the past. Thoughts immediately flooded his head. The scene abruptly stopped, but from the looks of it, there was a slim chance that Timar had died in that tower. Jean guessed, from the way Sarah and Fadler reacted to the appearance of the Kinzalo leader, that there was another reason supporting that assumption. In the scene, it was clear that Timar lacked the skill to pierce through Murakan's heart and destroy him. He was so broken that Murakan didn't need Sarah and Fadler to kill him, and the dragon would have done it easily. There was no way Timar could have put Murakan to sleep for 1,000 years from his prime. Even in that brief glimpse, Jean could clearly see how exorbitant Murakan's shadow energy had been. Contrary to what the Kinzalo leader claimed earlier, the scene demonstrated that it was Timar who lost control, not Murakan. But who knows if the situation changed after the incident? It's uncertain since the scene stopped. It was frustrating. If the recording device hadn't been damaged, he might have been able to see what would have followed as well. It wasn't different from the time with Sildare. Trying to fill in the gaps between scenes with guesses and assumptions made him feel distressed. I guess Misha would know, right? There must be a way to restore these recording devices. Wait, a moment. Recording devices. Recording. Right at that moment, a set of words and a name popped into Jin's mind. Recording magic. The recording magic of the Hister clan and his past life's master, Valeria Hister. She must be wandering the world to restore the lost ancient spells of the Hister clan. How come I never thought of my master? She might know something about the recording devices Sodaret left behind. Recording magic was a set of exclusive spells of the Hister clan. Although he had seen the legends and Sodaret use similar devices, they didn't come close to those of the Hister clan. Recording magic was also the main reason why the Zippel ensured the downfall of the Hister clan. Nothing sabotaged their efforts to manipulate history as the Histers' recording magic did. But how? How was he going to search for his former master, Valeria Hister? That was the problem. He had desperately wanted to meet her on several occasions after his return to life, but a complicated set of reasons forced him to wait for the right time. One of those reasons was finding the right cause. Now that he was a flag-bearer issuing an order, to locate Valeria wouldn't be too difficult. Or he could easily request it from the 7-colored peacocks. Jean knew all of Valeria's hiding places, the places she frequented, and even the false names she used. However, even if he could abruptly search for her to have a meeting on his own, Valeria would see him only as a stranger, and one with unclear motives at that. Since Misha had mentioned one of his master's false names, Arya Alhart, he could use that as an excuse to meet her. But getting to know him could also have a significant impact on her life. Despite their close relationship in the past life, they were complete strangers in the present. He remembered what Misha had said just before leaving Tychon, that you were chosen by the shadow, and Arya was chosen by history. If you ever cross paths with her, try to encourage her. On a larger scale, you could say she's your ally. At that time, Misha was cautious about mentioning more about his master. Now that my identity has been revealed, any hasty encounter could make her a target of my enemies. I must think carefully about this. First, I should meet with Misha and ask for her opinion to see what she would say. His forces were still not strong enough to guarantee Valeria's safety. Therefore, for the time being, Jean wanted to take more precautions when meeting with her. While he was busy with his thoughts, the ethereal plane broke rapidly. Once he exited it, he could see his companions standing on the giant clam. Then he noticed two objects. It was Sarah's broken sword and a new shadow energy pearl. Chapter 310. Fragment from the Past. Sarah. 3. Jean. Young master, are you all right? His companions approached. Jean handed the broken sword and the pearl to Jet and smiled bitterly. Yes, I'm fine. Shadow energy gathered in Jin's hand. The dark energy soon transformed into a flower. Jean placed it on the ground and bowed his head, to which his companions followed suit. It was a moment of silence for Sarah. Murakan and Quicantal seemed to have difficulty suppressing their emotions. Rest in peace, Lady Sarah. Almango still stood on the surface of the sea, waiting for the group. He had used his divine powers to create invisible steps, and the group followed the god to return to where they had come from. So, who was the guy inside, Jean Runcandle? Almango asked when they reached the beach. It was Lady Sarah Runcandle. Sarah Runcandle. Almango repeated her name over and over to himself, but he couldn't remember anything about her, no matter how many times he said her name out loud. I feel a certain nostalgia and sympathy, but for some reason, it seems like I don't remember anything about this Sarah Runcandle. Perhaps because the Zippel have erased her from history. Are you sure you even knew Sarah, Lord God of Clams? Almango nodded in response to Murakan's question. Yes, I knew her. My heart wouldn't ache so much if I didn't, right? But if the Zippel have completely erased her from history, shouldn't she have been erased from Murakan's and Quicantal's memories as well? Elisa asked. The Zippel clan's manipulation of history isn't perfect. If it were, I wouldn't have been able to gather all of you. It would have been impossible to hide Timar's second tomb once again with my powers if it were like that. Murakan and Quicantal nodded. That's right. They've always erased defeated enemies from history, but it has its limitations. That's why Runcandle could also maintain their existence while erasing the fact that they were also a family of magic swordsmen. It was also the same reason why Tsenmi's magic tome and Shujil Hister's tome still existed in the world, and why Valeria was still alive. But even though it's somewhat limited, I had trouble remembering Sildare and Sarah until I met the Guardians of the Tomb. That means even my own memory is being affected by their magic. Oh, I don't understand any of this at all. Jet? No, sir. Manipulating history? Can one really do such things with magic? It's not like they're playing at being gods or something. It's a tremendously dangerous power that should not be allowed for humans. And that's the kind of enemies we're up against. A brief silence followed Quicantal's words. The onlooker, that's what Sarah had accused her of being. But unlike 1,000 years ago, Quicantal was helping Jean. She was now fighting by his side. It also meant that her god, Ulta, wasn't against getting involved in Jin's battles. None of them got to hear the details of the story, but they all understood why Quicantal felt sorrow for Sarah. As a guardian dragon, she wasn't allowed the perfect free will that humans possessed. Regardless of her own choice, she had to obey the decisions set by the god she served and had to be willing to make any sacrifice for the contractor on any occasion. Such was the life of a guardian dragon. And yet, Murakan had tried to kill Timar. He couldn't imagine how tormenting it must have been for Murakan. Kid. Yes. So what did you see on the recording device this time? Come on, tell us. Jean looked at Almango and his companions. He had to do it for Murakan's sake. Could you give us a moment? Almango and the rest of the group didn't complain. They were about to give them some space when Murakan gestured with his hand. Everyone here is your companions, kid. It seems you've seen something bad about me. There's no need to keep it hidden. Tell us everything just as you saw it. So, shall I leave at least? Almango wanted to respect their privacy. Murakan smiled and gave him a pat on the shoulder. Join us. I'm a bit annoyed that Sodaret didn't leave any message for me, but it seems you were quite friendly with my old companions. Not to mention the incredible job you did in keeping Timar's second tomb hidden all this time. Jean nodded. What I saw there was how you tried to kill Timar. Everyone was left open-mouthed by his words. In contrast, Murakan and Quicantal seemed quite calm. The expressions on everyone's faces ranged from intrigue to sadness with each detail Jean gave about the fascinating stories of the old days. Murakan sighed when Jean finished the description. That Timar. I fought against him when he lost control and fell into a long sleep when he pierced my heart. However, as expected, Murakan didn't remember anything about the leader of the Kinzalo or the mysterious Dark Sea Tower. He didn't remember at all going to that tower with Sarah and Fadler. I have no idea who that strange idiot in the Dark Sea Tower is supposed to be. And as far as I recall, Timar didn't become that weak. Murakan was quite surprised to hear that Timar was supposed to be subdued so easily. The leader of the Kinzalo, huh? So, I met that idiot 1,000 years ago, huh? And here I was, thinking he was just some demon who had heard of me. Seems like he has something to do with me after all. Surprisingly, Murakan didn't seem confused about it. He simply decided to accept the fact that his memory was flawed. Above all other reasons, it was because Sodaret had left recording devices behind. The reason my damn god bothered to leave recording devices was probably that he considered my memory might have some issues. No, he must have been sure of it. If we carefully unravel each one of them, someday we'll get to the truth. But Murakan, Quicantal spoke up. What? About that phrase the Kinzalo leader was supposed to have said in the scene. About orphans. That he only extends goodwill to wretched orphans. Like someone very troubled with overflowing fortunes. You mean that part? Yes. Doesn't it sound familiar to you? Well, I'm not sure. But it does sound exactly like the kind of thing a hateful person might say to someone relatively weaker. The expression sounds familiar to me for some reason. You know those damn demons use flashy expressions for everything. I doubt it's anything important, but if it's bothering you, try looking into it. Are there any active demons these days? I heard the kid's older sister killed one once. The pendant that Luna had given to Jean back at the Storm Castle was an item that originally belonged to Oracle, a demon lord, and he obtained it after killing a demon. Murakan took the Shadow Energy Pearl from Jet. Seriously, I really don't want to, but it looks like I have to meet Misha as soon as possible. I have to find out if she knows anything about this pearl and what she might know about the scenes you've seen. You still have a few days of vacation left, right? About a week, yes. All right, then let's get started. We'll even have enough time to deliver Sarah's sword fragment to Pecan. Hey, god of clams. What? Thanks for keeping that kid's tomb safe. Murakan scratched his head as if it made him uncomfortable to say it. Almango just shrugged. Don't thank me. It was a request from Sodaret. How could I refuse? I know it must have been tough. Not to mention all the trouble you would have gone through if the Zippels ever discovered you. At that comment, Almango pretended to cough and nodded. Yes, it was quite tough. If you're really grateful, do you think I could ask you for a favor? Well, what is it? Almango looked around once again to check the reaction of Jean and his companions. Cookies. What? Do you think you could bring me more Rietla cookies? Seriously, it was an unforgettable flavor. Oh, come on. You must be crazy. You're supposed to be a god. I can't believe you're doing this for cookies. No wonder people, including myself, treat you like a useless god when you can even walk on water and handle such huge clams. Have some class, will you? Try living off seafood your whole life, and you'll see what I mean. I'll make sure someone is sent to deliver you cookies regularly, Almango. Jin's words made Almango's eyes light up. Are you serious? Of course. I couldn't be more grateful. My contractor, Clamwell, will finally get plenty for himself too. I've been feeling sorry for him all this time, you see. I hadn't realized I'd eaten almost all of them by myself. Jean chuckled and looked Almango in the eyes. But one more thing, Almango. Yes. Do you know who has the key to the third tomb? Jean and Murakin went there to deliver Sarah's broken sword to Pecan. He had nothing to add about the scene Jean saw in the second tomb. And then they immediately headed to see Misha. Please present your identification. A well-dressed waiter spoke in a dry tone. Jean and Murakin were in a luxury bar in the Kingdom of Mila to see Misha. The bar, called The Shadow, was exclusively reserved for members, and no one could enter without a recommendation from one of them. Even royalty couldn't access the place without following the rules. Elite members of global factions like the Runcandles, Zippels, or the Vermont Empire were exempt and granted entry, as long as they could present the emblems or symbols of their clans. However, Jean and Murakin were in disguise. We've come to see Mrs. Grace Shields. Instead, they presented the name of the bar's owner, known to an extremely rare number of people. The waiter immediately changed his attitude. I didn't realize you were the ladies' guests. Please forgive my discourtesy. Allow me to escort you inside. The waiter immediately led the two to a secret room and returned to his place. A black-haired lady was drinking alone inside the room. It's been a while, Jean. How have you been? Grace Shields. It was Misha's alias. She was the owner of the Shadow. The bar was one of her many hideouts. I've been great, thanks to you, Misha. I couldn't see you after the battle in the Western Sea. I apologize for not coming sooner to thank you. If you hadn't come to say something more important than a thank you, I would have beaten you up. Humph, you and your damn temper. If we didn't find you here, we were going to give up. How many hideouts do you need? They had to make over 20 jumps through portals in the last 2 days just to check all the hideouts she had indicated. Thanks to all those jumps, Murakin looked pale and ghastly. I can hear you begging for a beating. Damn? Did you just say damn? Come here. Let me twist your jaw in 6 directions. After a violent exchange of greetings, Jean handed her the 2 shadow energy pearls. Blood spurted from Murakin's mouth. Misha, who had been holding Murakin by the neck, pushed her brother aside and fixed her gaze on the pearls. Where did you get these? I went to Timar's tombs. Tell me more. Jean began describing from the day he met Pecan to how he found Almango. Misha seemed serious throughout the time Jean described what had happened. Like Murakin, she wasn't aware of the plans Soderette had made in the form of Timar's tombs. Jean, the pearls you've brought are recording devices. I've only heard of them. This is the first time I've seen one. They're recording devices? Yes, the scenes you saw were probably the result of these recording devices being activated. The recorded scenes were likely unstable because the device was damaged. Is it possible to repair them? This is how Misha responded to Jin's question. I find it impossible. Damn it, Misha. What do you want us to do if you can't? Murakin asked. That's enough from you. Jean, as I see it, it's time to look for that girl, Arya Owlheart. Jin's eyes widened. He didn't think Misha was the first to mention her name.